If you are exhausted by endlessly scrolling through mainstream streaming apps only to find sanitized green screen blockbusters, you are in luck. YouTube is quietly hoarding a treasure trove of brilliant, mind-bending science fiction that you can watch right now without spending a dime. We are talking about philosophical heavyweights, gritty post-apocalyptic nightmares, and visionary classics that built the genre's foundation. Here are 10 of the absolute best free sci-fi films available, so close your other tabs and let's dive in. Number 10. The Man from Earth, 2007. Gathering a group of brilliant academics in a single room for a farewell party sounds like the setup for an intimate stage play, but it rapidly transforms into a masterclass of intellectual tension when a retiring university professor casually reveals to his peers that he is actually a prehistoric Cro-Magnon man who has secretly survived for over 4,000 years. Relying entirely on the sheer strength of its dialogue and the mesmerizing, calm performance of David Lee Smith, the film challenges religion, biology, and human history without ever relying on a single frame of computer-generated imagery. The intellectuals attempt to systematically poke holes in his seemingly impossible story, using their respective fields of expertise to trap him in a lie, but the professor has a rational, historically grounded answer for absolutely everything, eventually leading to a deeply controversial discussion regarding his personal involvement in major biblical events. The behind-the-scenes creation of this narrative is legendary among science fiction fans. The script was the final magnum opus of legendary television writer Jerome Bixby, who famously dictated the final pages on his literal deathbed in 1998 after conceptualizing the idea for decades. Shot on a microscopic budget of barely $200,000, almost entirely within the claustrophobic confines of one single living room, the production was initially so small that director Richard Shankman actually had to rely on illegal file-sharing networks to build an audience, later famously thanking internet pirates for widely distributing the movie and turning it into a massive cult classic. The psychological hook is phenomenal because the audience is placed perfectly in the shoes of the highly skeptical scientists, constantly swaying back and forth between believing this man is a genuine immortal historical anomaly or simply a grieving friend suffering from a severe, elaborate psychological break. Without spoiling how this relentless intellectual chess match ultimately concludes, this dialogue-heavy thought experiment decisively proves that the most engaging special effect in all of science fiction is a genuinely brilliant script that forces you to completely reevaluate the foundational myths of human civilization. Number 9. Slipstream, 1989. Taking a sharp turn into the bizarre, this post-apocalyptic adventure drops viewers into a devastated future, where severe environmental collapse has ravaged the planet, creating massive, deadly winds that aggressively scour the ruined landscape. The narrative follows a ruthless, cynical bounty hunter who captures a highly mysterious fugitive, possessing a strange, almost magical connection to the elements, leading to a relentless pursuit across the apocalyptic wasteland by heavily armed lawmen and bizarre, weather-worshipping cultists. What makes this obscure film absolutely fascinating is its staggering behind-the-scenes pedigree. It was produced by Gary Kurtz, the legendary producer who had just finished working on the original Star Wars trilogy, and directed by Steven Lisberger, the visionary filmmaker who created the groundbreaking sci-fi epic Tron. Hoping to capitalize on the massive success of those franchises, the studio poured a reported $15 million into the budget, shooting across stunning, rugged locations in Turkey and Ireland to capture the sweeping aerial sequences featuring full-sized, custom-built aircraft performing genuinely dangerous stunts. The casting is equally baffling and incredible, bringing together Bill Paxton in a wildly energetic lead role alongside a stellar supporting cast that includes Ben Kingsley, Robbie Coltrane, F. Murray Abraham, and most notably, Mark Hamill returning to the silver screen to play a strictly lawful, chillingly antagonistic law enforcement officer in a sharp departure from his heroic Jedi persona. Unfortunately, the production was plagued by constant studio interference. Financiers demanded the script be hastily rewritten into a family-friendly adventure mid-shoot, leading to a notoriously messy editing process that completely removed the story's original, violent edge. The special effects team, many of whom were carried over directly from The Empire Strikes Back, struggled to piece together the heavily compromised vision, resulting in a film that ultimately failed to secure a theatrical release in North America and quietly slipped into the public domain. However, experiencing this deeply flawed, yet wildly ambitious epic today reveals a fascinating, gorgeous failure packed with incredibly detailed world-building, a phenomenal soaring musical score by legendary composer Elmer Bernstein, and dark truths about a ruined world that still resonate deeply with modern audiences. Number 8. Stalker, 1979. Venturing into the bleak, mesmerizing heart of Soviet cinema, director Andrei Tarkovsky delivers a grueling, hypnotic experience that follows an illegal guide, leading a writer and a professor through a heavily guarded, treacherous wasteland known simply as the Zone. Their ultimate destination is a mythical, highly restricted room that supposedly possesses the supernatural ability to grant a person's deepest, most authentic desires, but their journey rapidly becomes a perilous psychological test that forces each man to confront his own dark, hidden truths. The production history of this undisputed masterpiece is infamous for being one of the most hellish, cursed shoots in the history of filmmaking, ultimately taking a massive physical and mental toll on everyone involved. Tarkovsky originally spent an entire grueling year shooting the majority of the complex outdoor scenes in the industrial outskirts of Tallinn, Estonia, only to discover upon returning to the Moscow editing room that the experimental Kodak film stock had been improperly developed by the Soviet laboratories, rendering every single frame completely unusable. Refusing to abandon his vision, the director convinced the notoriously strict state funding committee to grant him a tiny extension, forcing him to rewrite the entire script from scratch and completely reshoot the movie with a brand new cinematographer. The new, incredibly hazardous shooting locations included heavily polluted rivers and abandoned chemical plants that poured toxic, white foam directly into the water, where the actors had to wade and lie down for hours to capture Tarkovsky's signature, painfully slow tracking shots. Tragically, several members of the crew, including the lead actor Anatoly Solzhenitsyn and Tarkovsky himself, later died from the exact same rare strain of bronchial cancer, leading the film's sound recordist to publicly claim that the beautiful but highly toxic Estonian locations literally poisoned the filmmakers. Watching the final product is an endurance test of slow cinema, heavily relying on philosophical debates regarding faith, art, and the selfish nature of human desire rather than flashy alien encounters or traditional special effects. The result is an overwhelmingly beautiful, sepia-toned nightmare that practically radiates a sense of profound melancholy, standing as a monumental, tragically fatal achievement in science fiction that demands your absolute patience and rewards you with lingering, profound dread. Number 7. A Boy and His Dog, 1975. Adapting a notoriously grim novella by fantasy author Harlan Ellison, this pitch-black comedy throws audiences into a brutal, radioactive wasteland following a devastating global nuclear war, focusing entirely on a deeply cynical, amoral teenager and his highly intelligent telepathic canine companion. Navigating the scorched remnants of the southwestern United States, their strange, symbiotic partnership is severely tested when the boy is lured into a bizarre, subterranean society that desperately needs his genetics to repopulate their sterile, terrifyingly pristine community. The independent production was a massive passion project for veteran Western character actor turned director L.Q. Jones, who struggled immensely to secure financing from traditional studios before ultimately raising the $400,000 budget entirely through private business associates and family members. Shooting in the blistering, unforgiving heat of the Mojave Desert and an abandoned amusement park in Venice, California, the crew had to endure grueling conditions to capture the authentic, sun-baked misery of the post-apocalyptic surface world. A young, completely unknown Don Johnson was cast in the lead role after the director auditioned over 600 different men, tasked with the incredibly difficult job of acting alongside a scene-stealing bearded collie named Tiger, who had previously gained fame as the family pet on the television sitcom The Brady Bunch. The canine's internal, highly misanthropic dialogue was provided by veteran voice actor Tim McIntyre, who also composed the film's bizarre, synthesizer-heavy musical score alongside Ray Manzarek, the legendary keyboardist from the rock band The Doors. The narrative is highly controversial for its unapologetic, deeply cynical view of humanity. There are absolutely no traditional heroes to root for here, as the film presents a bleak choice between the violent, hypersexual anarchy of the surface world and the suffocating, white-faced fascist conservatism of the underground bunker. The visceral, practical depiction of glowing mutants and struggling desert survivor communities heavily inspired the creators of the massive Fallout video game franchise decades later, proving that this fiercely independent, wildly offensive, and unapologetically dark satire remains one of the most influential dystopian visions ever committed to celluloid. Number 6. Dark Star, 1974. Serving as the ultimate antidote to the sterile, majestic reverence of space exploration, this fiercely independent sci-fi comedy focuses on a crew of incredibly bored, unhinged, and unhygienic astronauts who have been traveling the galaxy for 20 exhausting years, destroying unstable planets. Tasked with deploying highly advanced, sentient thermal bombs to clear pathways for future colonization, The crew is thrown into absolute panic when one of the intelligent weapons malfunctions, stubbornly deciding to detonate itself inside the ship's launch bay. The desperate crew members are forced to literally debate the philosophical concepts of phenomenology and existentialism with the weapon over the ship's intercom in a hilarious, frantic attempt to convince the machine not to explode. The origin of this bizarre masterpiece is legendary. It began as a scrappy 45-minute student film at the University of Southern California, co-written and directed by a young John Carpenter, and starring his classmate Dan O'Bannon, who would both go on to become absolute titans of the horror and science fiction genres. Shot on a microscopic budget of $60,000 over the course of several agonizing years, the resourceful filmmakers utilized wildly inventive practical effects to bring the spaceship to life, famously constructing the interior control panels out of painted ice cube trays, plastic toys, and discarded packaging materials. The movie's most iconic and hilarious sequence involves a crew member desperately battling an aggressive, mischievous alien mascot that was created by simply attaching rubber claws to a painted beach ball, a frustratingly comedic sequence that directly inspired O'Bannon to write a much darker, terrifying version of the exact same concept a few years later, which eventually became the legendary blockbuster Alien. The film masterfully captures the sheer, crushing monotony of deep space travel, portraying astronauts not as glorious pioneers with flawless military discipline, but as depressed, blue-collar workers slowly losing their grip on reality while dealing with broken equipment and terrible toilet paper. It is a wildly inventive, highly satirical gem that essentially birthed the used future aesthetic, proving that true cinematic genius often requires nothing more than a camera, a cheap beach ball, and a brilliant sense of humor. Number 5. Solaris, 1972. Created as a direct, deeply emotional response to the cold, technological perfection of Western science fiction, this Soviet masterpiece follows Dr. Chris Kelvin as he is dispatched to a decaying space station orbiting a mysterious, churning ocean planet. Tasked with investigating the severely deteriorating mental states and bizarre behaviors of the remaining scientific crew, the doctor soon discovers that the seemingly sentient alien ocean is actively probing their minds and manifesting their deepest repressed memories and traumatic past regrets into physical, breathing reality. Directed by the visionary Andrei Tarkovsky, the film is a monumental achievement in psychological storytelling, utilizing incredibly slow, deliberate pacing to force the audience to sit in the suffocating silence and emotional weight of the characters' overwhelming grief. The production was a massive undertaking for the Mosfilm Studios, requiring the construction of intricate, massive, and futuristic circular sets to represent the claustrophobic space station, contrasting sharply with the lush, intensely green, and incredibly long sequences shot on Earth to emphasize the characters' painful detachment from nature. The physical manifestations, referred to as guests, are not traditional movie monsters designed to frighten the audience. Instead, they are tragic, deeply sympathetic copies of deceased loved ones who possess their own fragile consciousness and suffer immense emotional pain when they realize they are merely synthetic constructs created from human guilt. Tarkovsky famously despised the sterile, emotionless focus on futuristic gadgets and spacecraft models that dominated the genre at the time, arguing that humanity's exploration of the cosmos was utterly pointless if it did not ultimately lead to a deeper understanding of the human soul. The cinematography is utterly hypnotic, utilizing shifting color palettes from stark black and white to muted, melancholic hues, while the chilling, electronic musical score by Eduard Artemyev perfectly captures the alien, isolating atmosphere of the ocean planet. Refusing to offer any easy answers or traditional action sequences, this nearly 3-hour epic is a dense, philosophical meditation on the nature of love, memory, and the terrifying realization that humanity might not be emotionally equipped to handle the incomprehensible vastness of the universe. Number 4. The Last Man on Earth, 1964. Laying the crucial, undeniable groundwork for the modern zombie apocalypse genre, this chilling Italian-American co-production stars horror icon Vincent Price as Dr. Robert Morgan, a desperate scientist who genuinely believes he is the sole survivor of a devastating global plague. Forced to navigate a desolate, corpse-littered city by day to hunt down the infected, he spends his terrifying nights barricaded inside his heavily fortified suburban home, slowly losing his mind to the crushing, inescapable isolation as the vampire-like creatures relentlessly pound on his front door. Based on the legendary novel I Am Legend by Richard Matheson, this adaptation is widely considered by genre historians to be the most faithful translation of the book's bleak, existential tone, directly influencing George A. Romero's creation of the modern flesh-eating ghoul just a few years later. The production was famously restricted by a remarkably tight budget, forcing the filmmakers to shoot on location in the eerily deserted, starkly modern architectural districts of Rome, which unintentionally provided the film with a haunting, surreal, and deeply European atmosphere that felt completely alien to American audiences. Price, usually known for his highly flamboyant, theatrical villains, delivers an incredibly restrained, heartbreaking performance, perfectly capturing the agonizing, monotonous daily routine of a man who must continually sharpen wooden stakes, burn infected bodies in massive pits, and listen to the agonizing taunts of his former friends outside his window. Matheson himself initially wrote the screenplay, but was deeply dissatisfied with the final edits and the casting of Price, whom he felt was not physically imposing enough for the rugged role, leading the author to famously use a pseudonym in the final credits. However, the film's brilliance lies precisely in the protagonist's vulnerability. He is not a slick action hero effortlessly mowing down hordes of monsters, but a grieving, profoundly exhausted man driven to the brink of alcoholism and madness by the overwhelming silence of a dead world. It is a stark, black-and-white nightmare that explores the horrifying psychological toll of absolute loneliness, building to a devastating, deeply cynical climax that forces the audience to question who the true monster of the story actually is. Number 3. La Jetée, 1962. Constructed almost entirely from a series of stark black-and-white still photographs, this experimental French featurette tells a profoundly tragic story set in the devastated, radioactive ruins of a post-World War II Paris, driven underground to survive. Ruthless scientists use an obsession with a haunting childhood memory to successfully send a traumatized prisoner backward through time, hoping he can secure desperately needed aid for the ruined present, only to watch him fall deeply in love with a woman from the past. Directed by Left Bank visionary Chris Marker, the production of this 28-minute masterpiece was incredibly unorthodox. Marker could only afford to rent a traditional motion picture camera for a single afternoon, resulting in only one brief 4-second shot of the woman opening her eyes, while the rest of the film was meticulously captured using a standard Pentax Spotmatic still camera. This unique photomontage technique creates a brilliant, stuttering rhythm that perfectly mimics the fragile, disjointed nature of human memory, forcing the audience to actively piece together the narrative gaps between the frozen images. The lack of traditional dialogue is replaced by an incredibly poetic, somber voiceover narration and a haunting choral musical score, interspersed with the chilling, whispered German directives of the medical experimenters, reflecting the very real, lingering anxieties of concentration camps and the looming threat of nuclear annihilation during the height of the Cold War. The prisoner's agonizing journey through different timelines explores the inescapable, fatalistic nature of destiny, heavily inspiring countless time travel narratives that followed, most notably serving as the direct structural blueprint for Terry Gilliam's massive Hollywood blockbuster 12 Monkeys decades later. By stripping away the kinetic motion of traditional cinema, the film forces viewers to focus entirely on the haunting composition of the faces and the suffocating atmosphere of the underground bunkers, creating an emotionally devastating experience. The narrative brilliantly suggests that humans are anchored to reality exclusively by the emotional weight of their memories, delivering a melancholic, fiercely intelligent puzzle that stands as one of the most uniquely crafted and intellectually stimulating science fiction films ever made. Number 2. The Day the Earth Caught Fire, 1961. Trading traditional Hollywood disaster tropes for gritty, rapid-fire journalistic realism, this British classic presents a terrifying scenario where simultaneous, massive nuclear detonations accidentally alter the Earth's orbit, sending the planet hurtling on a doomed, lethal collision course directly toward the sun. The unfolding global catastrophe is exclusively chronicled through the cynical eyes of a group of hardened, sweating newspaper reporters in London who must desperately uncover the massive government cover-up while dealing with escalating global panic, bizarre weather anomalies, and soaring, unbearable temperatures. Director Val Guest fought for 8 agonizing years to secure financing for the deeply anti-nuclear project, constantly facing rejection from studios who believed audiences had absolutely zero interest in watching a bleak film about atomic bombs. To ground the terrifying premise in absolute authenticity, the production was granted unprecedented access to the actual bustling headquarters of the Daily Express newspaper on Fleet Street, seamlessly blending the chaotic, real-world printing presses with the fictional narrative. Furthermore, the director boldly cast Arthur Christensen, the legendary, real-life former editor of the Daily Express, to basically play himself on screen, bringing a level of gruff, authentic newsroom authority that simply could not be faked by a traditional actor. The visual execution is remarkably effective despite the era's limitations. The filmmakers creatively utilized heavy yellow-tinted film stock for the opening and closing sequences to visually communicate the oppressive, baking heat, while thick, choking fog and sudden violent cyclones were practical effects that genuinely battered the actors on set. Unlike the square-jawed, flawless heroes of American sci-fi, the protagonist is a deeply flawed, washed-up alcoholic writer struggling with a bitter divorce, making his desperate scramble to report the end of the world feel incredibly grounded and human. By focusing intensely on the moral responsibility of the press, the devastating consequences of political arrogance, and the terrifying breakdown of a civilized society, this suspenseful, dialogue-heavy thriller delivers an atmosphere of suffocating, sweaty dread that remains disturbingly relevant in the modern era. Number 1. Metropolis, 1927. Standing as the undisputed, towering grandfather of the entire science fiction genre, this silent, German expressionist epic transports viewers to a massive, highly stratified dystopian city where wealthy industrialists rule from pristine high-rises while oppressed, exhausted workers toil on dangerous underground machines. The sprawling, revolutionary narrative follows the privileged, naive son of the city's ruthless master as he joins forces with a saintly, charismatic worker in a desperate attempt to bridge the violent, insurmountable divide between the classes, just before a sinister robotic imposter sparks a catastrophic, fiery rebellion. Directed by the legendary Fritz Lang, the production was a notoriously grueling, punishing endeavor that took nearly a year and a half to film, utilizing a staggering 36,000 extras, many of whom were desperately unemployed citizens who suffered through freezing water jets and real, scorching flames for the massive flood and explosion sequences. Before the invention of digital computers or optical printers, cinematographer Eugen Schuftan revolutionized visual effects by inventing a brilliant mirror technique that seamlessly combined live actors with intricate, hand-painted miniatures, creating the awe-inspiring, towering cityscapes that directly inspired the visual design of virtually every futuristic metropolis, from Blade Runner to Star Wars. The creation of the iconic, shimmering female robot, known as the Maschinenmensch, was a grueling ordeal for actress Brigitte Helm, who suffered severe cuts and heat exhaustion while encased in the rigid, heavy metallic suit. The film was actually a massive financial failure upon its initial release, heavily butchered and censored by international distributors, who felt its intense Marxist themes and running time were too controversial, resulting in massive chunks of the original footage being lost to history for over 80 years. It was not until a miraculous discovery of a battered, nearly complete print in an Argentinian museum archive in 2008 that audiences could finally experience Lang's complete, staggering vision in all its glory. A visual masterpiece of Art Deco design, deep philosophical religious allegory, and groundbreaking practical effects, this monumental cinematic achievement proves that the fears of industrialization, artificial intelligence, and class warfare have been haunting the human imagination for nearly a century. There you have it, 10 phenomenal sci-fi movies proving you do not need a pricey subscription to experience top-tier, mind-expanding cinema. Whether you prefer the time-bending tragedy of a French classic or the philosophical tension of a prehistoric caveman, YouTube has you covered. Let me know in the comments which one broke your brain the hardest. Hit that subscribe button for more deep dives into the best free movies online, and I will see you next time.